We wanted to meet here today to talk a little bit about what is currently happening. Us at DOT, we've met with STP late last week to hear from them their schedule and activities that they're going to undergo to resume mining. We are disappointed, as I'm sure some of the public is, in the delays that are associated with that restart. We definitely want people to understand that we do sympathize with them, that these delays are not what people were looking forward to. With that, though, we believe that it's nice to have a schedule from Seattle Tunnel Partners and some specifics about what they plan on doing. And what we're really envisioning here is still overall to get this tunnel complete, get this old viaduct taken down, and get this whole project and program completed. And we at DOT will be working with STP. We are partners in getting this done, but at the same time, we'll be using our expertise, and we will be monitoring what they do over this next time as they go through these milestones. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to the head of the STP, Chris Dixon, and he's going to talk some more specifics about the schedule and the work that's planned. And then we'll take questions.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good to see all of you again. We've started our work here at the TBM access shaft site. What you see behind me over on the east side of Alaskan Way here is some core drilling we're doing through the cap beams. The cap beams run along the tops of the secant piles that were installed much earlier in the project. We're coring holes through those so that we can then do jet grouting, which you see over here on the west side. And that's going down through that core drilled hole through the cap beam, down in between the piles, injecting cement and mixing it to fill the gaps between the piles so that we have a cutoff to the water for when we excavate the shaft. Following this work, we do some utility relocations to move utilities out of the way of where the shaft is going to be constructed. The shaft will be just behind me here. It's 83 feet in diameter, 120 feet deep. There's 75 piles that make up the ring of the shaft. Once those are in place, we'll excavate the shaft, put a concrete cradle in the bottom, and then we'll move the TBM forward into the shaft, at which point the front end will be disassembled. We'll have lifting equipment similar to the equipment we had when we assembled the TBM at the launch pit. They'll lift the front part out of the machine out of the ground up to the surface, rotate it horizontally, and then we'll start the repair the seals and the main bearing, the replacement of those. When that's complete, they'll be lowered back into the shaft, reattached to the front of the machine, and then the shaft will be backfilled. The machine will mine forward through the north wall of the shaft, and then we'll resume tunneling up Alaskan Way to reach Safe Haven 3 just before we cross under the viaduct and go down underneath downtown Seattle. That's overall the schedule. I think there's a timeline shown for that in the press release. You might remember several months ago I gave an optimistic date of September 1st. WSDOT's had to do a variety of archaeological borings here. There's been special attention given to protecting the viaduct, adjacent structures during construction. The design of the shaft is a very complex engineering undertaking. All of those things put together has taken more time than we anticipated. Therefore, the September 1st date, as I previously stated, was a very optimistic date. We've discussed with WSDOT, established a date of March. Internally within STP, we're fairly confident we can beat that date. We do have some contingencies built into the schedule in the event that Hitachi Zosen finds some more work that needs to be done when they disassemble the machine and lift it to the surface. So we're very confident we can beat that March date. We're going to be pressing all of the people engaged with that work, whether it's our subcontractors working now, the subcontractors doing the secant piles, Hitachi Zosen doing the repairs, plus our own crews to finish that work as quickly as possible and resume tunneling as quickly as possible. There's several weeks in there, but we're still looking at options for resequencing. We're looking at extended hours, extended shifts, additional days to try to bring that date back.
What's the effect this has had on the overall price tag? Extra 6 months?
Well, right now, if we don't start tunneling until March of next year, that means the tunnel boring's been stopped for 16 months. And we had an original contract completion date in the request for proposal that we submitted our proposal in response to. That was November of 2016. We bid the job to finish 11 months earlier in December of 2015. So right now, if this 16 months translated to a delay at the end, we'd be finishing 5 months later than the original required date of November 2016. But we're already taking steps to mitigate that delay, and we're very confident we're going to be able to bring the completion of the project back to at least that November 2016 original contract completion date.
How about cost, price?
Price?
Yeah.
That's all still being evaluated. Excuse me? It was a combination of things. We took special care in designing the shaft, both from a construction standpoint and then when we actually removed the TBM to make sure that there's no adverse effect on the viaduct. The shaft is completely enclosed. The dewatering we're going to do to facilitate the excavation is confined within the shaft. It won't be going outside of the shaft, creating settlement issues with the viaduct or adjacent structures. So it's been a very, very, very deliberate process for the design to make sure that we get something that can be constructed safely, meets our purposes with respect to completing the TBM repairs, and minimizes any potential effects to adjacent structures. The water table hasn't been a problem with getting this built. When you dewater in an area and you draw the water down, you do see some settlement, as we did earlier when we did some dewatering here. When we stopped and the water level came back up, that settlement essentially rebounded. But we don't want to deal with any of these issues with this TBM access shaft. So we've got a very controlled dewatering design. All the dewatering is going to be done from within the shaft, and it won't create settlement around the shaft.
Does this assume that nothing needs to be done with the main bearing?
No, our plan is to replace the seals that were damaged and to replace the main bearing. All we know at this time is there's some contaminants in the main bearing, which may or may not have resulted to damage to the main bearing, but we've told Hitachi that we want the spare replacement main bearing, which we're required to have under the contract. We want that here on site and installed. The old bearing can be taken out. If it's in a condition that it can be refurbished and become the replacement spare main bearing, that's what we'll do with the bearing that's in the machine. The bearing right now is at Hitachi Zosen's factory in Japan. It's being kept under a very controlled environment. They're going to ship it here just before we need to install it in the machine, so we don't have any issues with storing it out here on the site.
Can you elaborate on what you mean by contaminants?
Bits of sand and grit, things of that nature. Yeah, it'll be a continuous wall. It's formed by secant piles, the circular concrete piles. You do the adjacent ones, you do the intermediate ones, which lock into the two adjacent piles. So it's a continuous circular wall around the access pit. Excuse me? 75 piles. In some areas, there's a double layer of piles. Well, we start the secant piles in the middle of May. I think the dates are in the press release. Okay, and that takes about 2 months, which gets us to the middle of July. We spend 2 months excavating the shaft. Once it's excavated, we build a concrete cradle in the bottom for the TBM to come in and sit on. That takes 2 months, which takes us to the end of September. There's about 2 to 3 months, 3 months or so for Hitachi Zosen to do the repairs. Then we have to lower the machine, TBM parts back in, reassemble the machine, backfill the shaft, and then mine out of the shaft.
Okay, so it just wasn't factored into the original September estimate?
Well, the original September date, like I said, was optimistic. We thought we could get in and construct a shaft in pretty quick order. It appears that the repairs are more extensive than we originally thought. We were looking at basically at that time replacing the seals. We've made the decision to go ahead and replace the main bearing. The main thing we want to do is get the machine in tip-top 100% condition so that we don't ever have a repeat of this event for the balance of the tunneling. We want to make sure that the TBM is going to be able to successfully mine the rest of the tunnel without any of these further incidents. So part of the time that we're taking is to ensure that we have the machine in that condition. We could do a much abbreviated thing, but we don't want to proceed on that basis. We want a machine that that Hitachi Zosen promised to deliver us under the contract and that can successfully mine underneath Seattle. The original schedule had certain things sequenced before the tunnel drive, during the tunnel drive, after the tunnel drive. And what we're doing now with the stoppage is we're taking the opportunity to do some work that was previously scheduled to be done after completion of the tunneling, pulling that forward in the schedule. So there's a variety of things that we're doing even at this point in time to mitigate that delay. Right now it's about that 11 months, from December 15th to November of 2016.
Linda, if you're talking about when was it going to open to traffic, right now the schedule that STP has shared with us is that instead of it opening in January of 15, it would be back to November of 2016, back to the date that was in the original RFP. So that's a 11-month. So they would have to figure out how to recover 4 to 5 months of schedule between now and then to be able to make that date. And as I mentioned, we'll be monitoring and watching these milestones that they said they're going to meet and match them also and follow contract language on how we should evaluate those.
Are you canceling the late penalties if they meet November of 16?
So anything to do with liquidated damages or incentives will still be in accordance with the contract as it stands right now. Yeah, we're not canceling. Any liquidated damages or incentives would be matched against the original contract dates and the way the contract is written right now. Yeah, correct. Remember, this is a fixed price contract, and Seattle Tunnel Partners has the obligation to complete this tunnel in the project for the price that they bid, and that is still the plan. As has been mentioned before, there's been nothing submitted to DOT that has led us to believe anything different. So yeah, right now it would be the same cost as the taxpayers were expecting at the beginning of the project. The cost should be the same.
What have your archaeological digs found, and you're going to have to disturb ballast islands?
There's not much that we can say publicly about the archaeological information. I would just say that it all is expected to be clear to be able to hit that scheduled start date of mid-May for the placement of the secant piles. So everything is pretty much on track to complete the environmental documentation for this additional work.
You're not going to have to avoid certain areas?
There's no, again, the details on what goes public with Archaeological is a little bit more touchy, but yeah, there's nothing to believe that it's going to impact the ability to do this rescue shaft and do this work.
There's a lot of civil work down here. So I'm not going to open any of those ramps and interchanges.
Not that we're planning to at this time, Mike. Right, all that's going to be evaluated, but again, we're going back to STP's schedule is showing that they would open to traffic as was in the original RFP, so it's pretty much as the program was originally planned. I think there was a question back here. SCP has not shared any of that information with us. Chris, do you want to speak to that?
You're talking about the one cause to the damage of the TBM? That's still being looked at, and we'll learn more once we get the TBM up to the surface and we're able to do a full inspection. You're asking if STP agrees with the state on what? On penalties? And LDs? Well, this is all going to be dealt with within the terms and conditions of the contract. Like I said, that we haven't identified the exact cause of the delay yet. We've put some notices into WSDOT. There's still several things in play. Who's ultimately responsible and liable for that time and that cost is going to be determined by a review of the contract and negotiating those things within the terms and conditions of the contract.
Yeah, as we've mentioned, all these types of discussions will just be in accordance with the contract.
No, we're still waiting for Hitachi Zosen's detailed plan. They have to disassemble a portion of the machine to expose the main bearing, remove the old main bearing, clean out the housing, so to speak, reinstall, test, seal it up. So we're getting all those details the middle of next month. Excuse me? Yes, what we're actually going to do is, you might remember when we installed the machine, the cutter head weighed 800 or 900 tons. It was the last piece put in the front of the machine. Prior to that, the cutter drive unit that had the blue motors all the way around, that's about a 1,000-ton piece. That was installed in the machine, and then portions of the shield were put over the cutter drive unit, and then the cutter head was attached to the front of the machine. This time we're going to be taking off portions of the shield above the cutter drive unit and then remove the cutter drive unit and the cutter head as one piece, which is almost 2,000 tons. So that's another thing that's contributed to the engineering, because it's going to be right over the shaft. The shaft has to support that weight. Hitachi Zosen's been discussing lifting these components with heavy lift companies. But what that does is it saves time for disconnecting the cutter head, lifting the pieces out separately. It saves time for reattaching the cutter head when we're reassembling the machine. And by picking all of that out as one unit and rotating it at the surface, it's going to help to facilitate the repair. So these are the types of planning and analysis that have been going on over the past several months in order to come up with an optimum plan for doing this work. The other thing that does is that when it's all assembled again, we've got what we feel is a better product, because we haven't been detaching the cutter head, reattaching the cutter head. It's all coming out as one unit. And again, the goal is to have a machine that's 100% in tip-top shape, everything functioning perfectly, and so we can successfully tunnel under Seattle. Some other time that we've added to the schedule is we've still got 500 feet to go from here up to what we call Safe Haven 3. The machine's still in the phase where it's being tested and commissioned. Hitachi Zosen, we don't take what we call the final acceptance, so to speak, of the machine until further up the line. So we're still in this testing phase, and once we resume tunneling, we're going to be going very slowly and deliberately up here to make sure all systems are go before we leave Safe Haven 3, go under the viaduct and tunnel under Seattle.
Is the bearing part of this big combination you're pulling up? Does that include the bearing?
Yeah, the bearing's part of that assembly.
So the bearing's going to be replaced at the surface and then the whole bang is going
That's right. The bearing and main seals will be replaced at the surface. That whole component of the TBM will be lowered and reassembled below ground.
What else has to be done within the machine to resist torque or downward force? Anything?
That's another thing Hitachi Zosen's looking at. We don't have their final repair plan yet.
So let's take a few more questions, and then anybody who wants to can come up over to the viewing platform.
How confident are you that you'll have a machine at the end of this that's in tip-top shape? You can't agree or you don't know what caused the damage? Or are you confident that you'll find out what caused the damage?
We're confident we're going to find out what caused the damage when we're doing the repairs or after we complete the repairs, and we're very confident that we're going to have what you call a tip-top machine to complete the balance of the tunnel drive.
How many layoffs have there been, and how many more do you expect?
We've had about 60 layoffs, and we're still looking at the work that's going to be done over this interim time frame while the TBM repairs are in progress. As I've said, we're advancing other work sequence-wise to perform that earlier than originally planned. You still have to remember there's millions and millions of dollars of construction still progressing on the job, both at the north end and the south end. So the tunneling component of the job from a manpower standpoint was relatively small, but we've laid off 60 persons, and we're looking at kind of right-sizing the crews for the work that we're going to be doing over the next several months.
How many do you employ right now?
We have about 300 people employed on site.
So how much of a financial hit is STP going to take on this?
That remains to be seen. In my mind, the two most challenging parts are constructing the shaft, getting those secant piles right so we've got a continuous wall all the way around. Excavating the shaft presents unique challenges, constructing the concrete cradle in the bottom. The other thing we have to do once the shaft is built, we have to mine the TBM forward about 7 rings to get it into the shaft. Lifting that large a piece out of the ground and up to the surface, that's a very complex engineering. There's critical lift plans being prepared to do that work. The repairs themselves are very complex, so it's a whole series of very complex and challenging activities that we're embarking on now to get the TBM up and running again.
Chris, when they did this in Sarnia about 20 years ago, they had originally some pretty skeletal plan around for the shaft design. They had some painting and problems, and they had the engineer had to delay. Are you confident nothing like that will happen here?
Yeah, we don't anticipate any caving in problems in the shaft because we're installing the secant piles from the ground surface. And when they're all installed, we basically have a circular wall underground all the way to the bottom of the shaft. So as we excavate the shaft, we are putting in what are called concrete ring beams in the shaft as we go down, and that supports the sides of the shaft from deflecting inward from the soil and groundwater pressure outside. So yeah, one of the things we definitely want is a very stable shaft, and that's what's also taken some time is the design. We've gone through many iterations looking at different schemes to support the ground, and we now have a design that we're very, very comfortable with.
See, this is obviously going to cost money. Delays are going to cost money for someone somewhere. But every time it seems we all ask, we'll wash out NSTP. What are the costs going to be? Are there going to be any answers? Always, we don't know. Man, it's too premature. We don't think it's going to affect anything. Or is it that you don't know, or that you're just not willing to tell us?
Well, the costs are still being determined. We know that we have some costs. We don't know what the end cost is going to be for this operation here. But like I said, once that's known, to the extent that we feel that we have a right to recover the costs and time under the contract, we'll pursue that under the appropriate contract clauses, and then we'll enter into negotiations with WSDOT under the terms and conditions of the contract to finally determine where the responsibility and liability lies.
And then just to mention from the DOT side, we've yet to see anything or understand anything about this situation that would lead us to believe that there is a contractual reason to where the Department of Transportation or the taxpayers should pay any cost associated with this. So everything that's been presented to us and everything that we understand around the situation shows that this would be STP's responsibility to fulfill and take care of this under the original bid. So we're not trying to avoid the question at all. We just believe that the situation that you're seeing here is the responsibility of Seattle Tunnel Partners. I haven't ran those numbers in the contract. There's a variety of different types of liquidated damages, and then there is an incentive. So you would have to run those, and you'd really have to do it at that point in time, because there could be other things that might happen along the way of the contract that could modify some of those dates. And so just to project that right now it's not as simple as it sounds. Again, the contract is online, and the language is there where you can see just how complicated those issues actually are.
Right there.
Yeah, both sides.
No, we're drilling core. Yeah, we're going to be grouting both sides. They're drilling core holes over here now to get the jet grouting equipment down into the ground like they're doing over here.
And are those between the existing?
They're between the existing piles. Yeah, to seal that interface or that gap between the piles.
Well, what about out front? Are you going to bring another one out here?
No, the front will be the circular wall of the shaft. Well, the additional steps we're taking to protect the viaduct is limiting the dewatering to the inside of the shaft. We're coming up with a very robust shaft design that when we excavate the shaft, the walls don't move and create any movement of the ground outside the shaft. So we're looking both from a groundwater standpoint and from a soils disturbance standpoint or soil movement standpoint to ensure that there's no damage to the viaduct as a result of the shaft construction.